Get him out, Victoria Langford said before Marcus Reed could even say his name. The words cut across the 48th floor boardroom with the clean, cold edge of polished glass. For 1 second, nobody moved. 12 executives sat around the long walnut table, their tablets glowing, their coffee untouched, their eyes flicking between the woman at the head of the room and the black man standing near the door with a weathered leather briefcase in one hand. Marcus had arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a dark blue suit that fit well but did not shine, a white shirt without a designer logo, and brown shoes still marked with a faint trace of rain from the Chicago sidewalk below. He did not bring an assistant. He did not bring a lawyer. He did not bring the kind of entourage Victoria expected from people who wanted access to her company. That was all she seemed to see. Not his calm posture. Not the appointment confirmation in his hand. Not the way his eyes had already moved across the financial projections on the wall and stopped at the one line everyone else was pretending not to fear. Victoria leaned back in her chair, silver pen balanced between 2 fingers, her blonde hair pulled tight enough to make her expression seem even sharper. "I don't know how you made it past reception," she said, her voice low enough to sound controlled and loud enough for every person in the room to hear. "But this meeting is for investors, not walk-ins." A soft laugh broke from somewhere near the end of the table, quickly swallowed when Marcus turned his head. He did not glare. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at the faces around him, one by one, as if giving each person a quiet chance to become better than the moment. No one did. Grant Whitmore, seated beside Victoria in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus's first car, folded his hands and smiled like a man watching a door close exactly when he needed it to. Marcus noticed that too. He noticed everything. "Ms. Langford," he said, steady and measured, "my office confirmed this meeting yesterday. I'm here regarding the capital round." Victoria's mouth tightened, not because she believed him, but because he had spoken with the kind of calm that did not ask permission to exist. Behind her, the screen showed Langford Medical Systems' emergency funding proposal, a desperate attempt to keep its AI diagnostic platform alive after 2 banks had refused to extend credit. The technology could detect early-stage conditions in rural clinics where specialists were hundreds of miles away. It could save lives in places investors rarely visited. But inside this room, it had become numbers, leverage, ownership, survival. Marcus took 1 step forward and looked past Victoria at the term sheet glowing on the screen. "That clause," he said quietly, "doesn't fund your company. It buries it." The room changed. Not loudly. Not all at once. It changed in the way shoulders stiffened, in the way Evelyn Brooks, the CFO, stopped breathing for half a second, in the way Grant's smile thinned at the edges. Victoria felt the shift and hated that it had come from him. A man she had already decided did not belong. "Excuse me?" she asked, each syllable wrapped in ice. Marcus kept his eyes on the screen. "Section 9 gives the lead partner control of patient data licensing if revenue targets miss by more than 8% in the first quarter. With your current burn rate, you'll miss that target before Labor Day. After that, you won't be taking investment. You'll be handing over the heart of the company." Silence pressed against the glass walls. Far below, traffic moved along the river like thin red veins, but up here the air felt sealed, expensive, and suddenly short of oxygen. Evelyn's fingers moved toward her tablet. Grant's jaw shifted. Victoria saw both reactions, and something hot and defensive rose behind her ribs. She did not hear a warning. She heard embarrassment. She heard challenge. She heard a man she had mistaken for nobody explaining her own company in front of people who were supposed to fear her. "I don't take legal advice from strangers off the street," she said. Marcus looked at her then, fully, and for the first time her certainty flickered. There was no anger in his face. That made it worse. Anger would have given her something to dismiss. His dignity gave her a mirror. Victoria reached for the small black button near her conference phone. "Security," she said, without looking away from him. "There's an unauthorized visitor in the executive boardroom," Evelyn whispered. "Victoria, maybe we should verify," No! Victoria snapped, still staring at Marcus. Next time, Mr. Reed, use the service entrance. The sentence landed harder than the order itself. A few eyes dropped to the table. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Even the air seemed to pull back. Marcus stood very still, his hand resting on the handle of his old briefcase, the leather darkened by years of weather and work. For a moment, the room saw only the man being dismissed. They did not see the fund he controlled, the hospitals he had saved, the promise he had made beside his sister's hospital bed decades earlier. They did not see $500 million walking toward the door. They only watched as security arrived, as Marcus turned without protest, and as Victoria Langford mistook his silence for defeat. The elevator doors closed behind Marcus Reed with a sound so soft it felt more final than a slam. He stood between two security guards who were careful not to touch him now, maybe because of the way he carried himself, maybe because even they could sense they had been asked to remove the wrong man. The mirrored walls reflected him from every angle, the dark blue suit, the old leather briefcase, the reins still beaded along the shoulders of his coat. He looked smaller in that silver box than he had in the boardroom, but only from a distance. Up close, there was a steadiness in him that made the silence feel occupied. The elevator descended from the 48th floor through layers of glass, money, and polished confidence, and Marcus watched the numbers fall without blinking. 47. 46. 45. He had been in taller buildings than this. He had sat across from governors, hospital presidents, venture capital sharks, and men who smiled while trying to sell suffering back to the poor at a profit. Being dismissed was not new. Being misread was not new. The old wound was not surprise. It was repetition. In the lobby, the ceiling rose 3 stories above him, all white stone and winter light, the kind of place built to make ordinary people lower their voices. A receptionist behind a curved desk looked up, then quickly looked away. 2 young analysts near the security gate froze with badges in their hands. One of them, a black woman no older than 25, met Marcus's eyes for half a second. There was apology in her face, but also fear. Fear of rent. Fear of student loans. Fear of becoming visible at the wrong moment. Marcus gave her the smallest nod, not permission, not comfort, just recognition. He knew what it meant to survive inside rooms that were not designed to welcome you. Outside, Chicago wind pushed rain across the sidewalk in thin silver lines. Marcus stepped beneath the awning and paused. The city smelled like wet concrete, brake dust, roasted coffee from a cart on the corner, and the river turning cold under an April sky. Taxis hissed along the curb. Somewhere a siren bent around the buildings and faded west. He opened his briefcase, not because he needed anything from it, but because his hands had learned long ago to find steadiness in ritual. Inside, beneath the investment packet Langford Medical Systems had begged to receive 3 weeks earlier, was a small photograph sealed in a clear sleeve. Naomi Reed at 13, sitting on the back steps of their old apartment in Detroit, wearing a yellow sweatshirt 2 sizes too big and grinning with one missing front tooth. Marcus touched the edge of the photo with his thumb. Not the face. Never the face. The memory came with the rain. Naomi coughing in the kitchen while their mother argued with an insurance office on the phone. Naomi laughing anyway, because she thought laughter could make adults less afraid. Naomi sent home twice from an overworked clinic with the wrong diagnosis because the specialist was 40 miles away and the family car had not run in months. By the time the right doctor saw her, the room had already changed. The air had already become that heavy hospital air, full of disinfectant and prayers people were too tired to say out loud. Marcus had been 19 then, old enough to understand the words, too young to survive their meaning cleanly. He remembered standing in a hallway while a nurse told his mother they had done everything they could. He remembered his mother pressing both hands to her mouth so her grief would not scare the other children. He remembered making a promise with no money, no plan, and no audience. If he ever had power, he would use it where power arrived too late for Naomi. That promise had taken 23 years to build. Night classes. A scholarship. A rented room above a laundromat. His first job at a community credit union where he learned how families drown one late fee at a time. His first investment, made from savings so small that losing it would have meant skipping meals. Then another. Then a clinic network in Ohio. Then a rural imaging company in Alabama. Then Reed Horizon Capital, a name people now said carefully in rooms full of polished wood. Marcus had never chased luxury. He chased usefulness. Money was only weight until it was placed on the right side of someone's future. That was why Langford medical systems had mattered. Their technology was imperfect, expensive, and dangerously close to being swallowed by men like Grant Whitmore, but it worked. In a mobile clinic outside Tulsa, it had flagged a heart condition in a boy whose family could not afford a specialist. In eastern Kentucky, it had helped a nurse practitioner catch early-stage cancer before a mother of 3 lost time she did not have. The data was real. The need was real. And Victoria Langford, for all her sharp edges and colder instincts, had built something that could reach people the old system kept forgetting. Marcus closed the briefcase slowly. Across the street, high above the rain, the Langford logo glowed blue against the glass tower. He should have walked away. Pride would have made that easy. Any other founder would have lost Reed Horizon's offer before the elevator reached the lobby. But Marcus had not come for Victoria. He had not come for the board. He had not even come to be respected, though respect should not have been too much to ask. He had come for the patients who would never know his name, the nurses waiting on better tools, the children whose lives might depend on a warning arriving before the pain did. A black sedan pulled to the curb, his driver stepping out with an umbrella, but Marcus lifted one hand, asking for a moment. The rain tapped against the awning like fingers on a closed door. Behind him, the tower breathed out warm air and quiet shame. Ahead of him, the city kept moving. Marcus slipped Naomi's photo back into place, locked the briefcase, and looked once more toward the 48th floor. Victoria Langford had mistaken humility for weakness. That was her first mistake. Believing his silence meant he was gone would be her second. Up on the 48th floor, Victoria Langford remained standing long after Marcus Reed had been taken out of the room. No one spoke. The boardroom, which only minutes earlier had carried the polished rhythm of high-level negotiation, now felt strangely airless, as if the glass walls had sealed in something no one wanted to name. Victoria kept her eyes on the closed door, her hand still near the conference phone, her silver pen lying untouched beside the contract. She told herself the silence was respect. She told herself her team had seen leadership. She told herself a chief executive officer could not allow unknown men to interrupt a private funding meeting and speak as though they owned the place. But beneath those thoughts, small and sharp, was the look on Marcus's face when she mentioned the service entrance. Not anger. Not fear. Not even humiliation. Recognition. As if he had heard those words in 100 different forms before and had decided, long ago, not to let them reach the part of him that mattered. Victoria hated that look most of all because it made her feel seen. Grant Whitmore cleared his throat first, gentle and practiced, like a man smoothing a wrinkle from silk. "Well," he said, glancing around the table. "That was unfortunate, but perhaps useful. Desperate situations attract desperate people." A few executives gave weak nods, grateful for a sentence they could hide behind. Evelyn Brooks did not nod. She sat 2 seats away from Victoria, her gray hair tucked behind one ear, her reading glasses low on her nose, her fingers still resting beside her tablet. Evelyn had spent 30 years in finance, long enough to know when a room was lying to itself. Her eyes moved back to the term sheet on the screen. Section 9. Patient Data Licensing. Revenue Targets. 8%. She had reviewed that clause twice the night before and told herself the language was aggressive but manageable. Now Marcus's words sat in her mind like a coin dropped into deep water, falling, turning, catching light. Victoria noticed her staring. "Evelyn," she said, crisp as frost. "Do you have a concern?" Evelyn looked up slowly. "I have a question." Grant smiled before she could continue. "I am sure your legal team has questions. That is what final review is for. But we all understand the larger picture. Langford Medical Systems needs immediate capital. My group is prepared to provide it. Prepared. The word sounded generous. It was not. Everyone in that room knew the company was running out of days, not months. Payroll was due Friday. A bridge loan had collapsed that morning. A national health network had paused deployment until the funding crisis was resolved. Reporters were already circling the phrase liquidity event like birds over a field. Victoria had built Langford Medical Systems from a lab prototype and a half-empty office above a dentist in Evanston. She had pitched to men who called her sweetheart, investors who asked whether she planned to start a family, hospital boards that smiled at her research and then gave contracts to louder companies run by older men. She had learned to survive by becoming colder than the rooms she entered. No hesitation. No softness. No visible doubt. Her father, Arthur Langford, used to say business was a room full of knives wrapped in handshakes. He had founded a pharmaceutical distribution empire and taught his daughter that kindness was acceptable only after control had been secured. Victoria believed him because control had gotten her this far. Control had put her face on magazine covers. Control had made senators return her calls. Control had helped her build technology that could read scans faster than an overburdened hospital system could move paperwork from one desk to another. But control was also slipping. She could feel it in the tiny pauses before her executives answered. She could see it in the late-night emails from engineers asking if their health insurance would continue through the summer. She could hear it in the careful tone of bankers who used to call her brilliant and now called her exposed. Grant leaned forward, his cuff links flashing under the recessed lights. Victoria, we should proceed before the market opens tomorrow. The longer we wait, the more leverage disappears. He said leverage as if he meant opportunity, but Evelyn heard the other meaning. Pressure. Ownership. Surrender. Victoria looked at the screen again. She knew what signing meant. A lifeline. A headline. A chance to tell employees everything was stable. She also knew what refusing meant. Missed payroll. Panic. A board vote. Possibly the end of the company that had consumed 10 years of her life. Still, Marcus's warning hovered at the edge of the room. That clause does not fund your company. It buries it. Victoria turned away from the screen and walked to the window. Chicago stretched below in wet steel and gray light, Lake Michigan flat and cold beyond the skyline. From this height, people disappeared into movement, into traffic patterns, into numbers. It was easier to make hard decisions when human beings were reduced to scale. Behind her, Grant waited. Evelyn watched. The executives held their breath. Victoria saw her own reflection in the glass, expensive suit, perfect posture, tired eyes, a queen standing inside a tower that was beginning to crack. We reconvene tomorrow morning, she said at last. Grant's smile tightened. That may cost you. Victoria turned back, her face composed again. So would signing blind. It was the first wise thing she had said all day, but pride would not let her admit whose voice had led her there. By the time the executives left, the boardroom had become a place of small sounds. Tablet covers clicked shut. Chairs rolled back softly over the carpet. Coffee cups were lifted and abandoned again. Nobody wanted to be the first to mention the man who had been escorted downstairs, but nobody could fully return to the meeting either. Victoria stood at the head of the table while her staff moved around her like people leaving a church after a difficult sermon. Grant Whitmore lingered near the screen, his smile still polite, though it no longer reached his eyes. Evelyn Brooks remained seated, reviewing the term sheet line by line, her glasses catching the cold light from the ceiling. You are wasting precious time, Grant said quietly, stepping closer to Victoria. Your company does not have the luxury of moral theater. Victoria looked at him. A stranger identified a control trigger in your document before my own team finished discussing it. That deserves review. Grant gave a soft laugh. Or he guessed. People like that are very good at sounding confident when they want attention. The phrase landed badly. Even Victoria heard it. She turned toward him with a look sharp enough to stop the sentence from going further. Grant raised both hands, charming again. I only mean that you should be careful. In times like this, everyone wants to appear important. Across the table, Evelyn's finger stopped on the screen. Section 9 is not a guess, she said. The room, almost empty now, seemed to tighten. Victoria walked back to the table. What did you find? Evelyn rotated the tablet so Victoria could see it. Her voice was controlled, but the color had drained slightly from her face. The language is cleaner than he made it sound, but he was right about the effect. If we miss first quarter revenue by more than 8%, Whitmore Strategic Partners gains licensing authority over the patient data models tied to the core platform. Victoria frowned. Temporary authority. Evelyn shook her head once. It says temporary, but the renewal mechanism is automatic unless both parties agree to terminate. If we are dependent on their capital, they have no reason to agree. Grant's jaw tightened for only a fraction of a second, but Marcus would have seen it. Evelyn saw it too. Victoria felt a pressure behind her eyes. She read the clause herself, once, then again. The words were ordinary enough to pass under tired eyes: performance protection, continuity provision, market stabilization. Language made to sound like shelter while hiding a cage. She looked at Grant. Why was this not explained plainly? Grant's expression softened into practiced disappointment. Victoria, everything is in the document. Your counsel has had it for 48 hours. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters in a deal of this size. A long silence followed. Outside the glass walls, rain threaded down the windows, turning the skyline into streaks of gray and blue. Inside, Victoria felt the days slipping away from her, not dramatically, not with a crash, but with the awful quiet of control, leaving one finger at a time. She thought of the engineers on the 32nd floor, still working through lunch, trying to improve a model that could help rural clinics read scans without waiting weeks for a specialist. She thought of the hospital pilots scheduled in Montana, Mississippi, and West Virginia. She thought of the company-wide email she had drafted that morning but had not sent because every sentence sounded like reassurance written by someone afraid. Then she thought of Marcus standing near the door, not demanding status, not waving credentials, simply trying to stop her from signing away the thing her people had built. Evelyn, Victoria said, run a full exposure analysis. I want every trigger, every default, every hidden transfer right. Evelyn nodded. Already started. Grant's polite mask thinned. You cannot be serious. You are letting a walk-in derail a $500 million rescue package. Victoria's head turned slowly. You keep calling it a rescue package. Because that is what it is. Then why does it feel like a funeral arrangement? The words surprised even her. Grant's smile disappeared, but only for a breath. Then he stepped back, buttoned his jacket, and glanced toward the door. You have until 9 in the morning. After that, our terms change. He left without offering his hand. The door closed with a muted click, leaving Victoria and Evelyn alone in the boardroom. For the first time all day, Victoria sat down. Not at the head of the table, but in the nearest chair, as if her body had finally admitted what her pride would not. Evelyn slid Marcus's abandoned appointment printout across the table. It had been found near the door after security escorted him out, bent slightly at one corner, the ink smudged by rain. Victoria stared at the name. Marcus Elijah Reed. Confirmed meeting. Private capital discussion. Her throat tightened, though she forced her face to remain still. Why did reception not tell me? She asked. Evelyn's answer was quiet. They did. The note was in your briefing packet. Victoria opened the folder beside her and searched through the pages with sudden, controlled urgency. There it was, clipped behind the schedule, ignored beneath the investor bios she had chosen to read first. No photograph. No entourage. Just a name she had not cared enough to recognize. The rain kept tapping the glass. Evelyn stood to leave, then paused. Victoria, she said softer now. He tried to help us after you insulted him. Victoria did not answer. Her eyes remained on the paper, on the name, on the proof that the door had not been closed by mistake. She had closed it herself. By 7:30 that evening, the 48th floor was no longer bright with corporate confidence. Half the lights had dimmed automatically, leaving the hallway washed in a pale blue glow, and the offices beyond the glass walls looked like aquariums after closing. Victoria Langford sat alone in the boardroom with the full Whitmore term sheet spread across the table, page after page marked in red by Evelyn's team. Every mark felt like a warning she should have heard earlier. Trigger rights. Data control transfer. Emergency governance provision. Automatic renewal. The words were not loud, but they were merciless. They showed her the shape of the trap Marcus Reed had seen in seconds. A trap she had nearly signed because the man offering it wore the right suit, spoke the right language, and entered through the right door. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the board chairman. Another question about funding. Another reminder that payroll was due in 3 days and the company's cash position had fallen below the minimum required by their credit agreement. She turned the phone face down, but the pressure did not disappear. It moved into the room with her, into the glass, into the carpet, into the empty chairs where her executives had avoided looking at each other after Grant left. Down the hall, a cleaning cart rolled softly past the conference room. Victoria glanced toward it, then looked away too quickly, ashamed of the memory that followed. Next time, use the service entrance. She heard her own voice now without the armor of anger around it. It sounded smaller than she remembered. Crueler. Less like leadership and more like fear wearing a designer jacket. Evelyn had gone downstairs to coordinate with outside counsel, but before leaving she had placed one more file in front of Victoria. Reed Horizon Capital. Confidential profile. Victoria had not opened it for almost an hour. Pride had kept her hand away from the cover as if the paper itself could accuse her. Finally, when the building grew quiet enough that she could hear the rain against the windows, she pulled the file closer and turned the first page. Marcus Elijah Reed, founder and managing partner. Healthcare infrastructure, rural diagnostics, emergency medical technology. Long-term capital commitments exceeding $2.7 billion. No hostile takeovers. No founder removals in active care-related companies. No data resale agreements. Victoria read that line twice. No data resale agreements. In her world, that kind of restraint was almost suspicious. She turned the page and found photographs from clinics funded by Reed Horizon, a mobile diagnostic van outside Tulsa, a small hospital in Kentucky with peeling paint and new imaging equipment, a community health center on the south side of Chicago where children sat beneath a mural of bright yellow birds. None of it looked like the glossy investor decks she was used to. It looked human. Messy. Necessary. Then she found Naomi Reed's name in a short biographical note attached to a foundation report. Younger sister. Deceased after delayed diagnosis. Inspiration for Reed Horizon's early diagnostic mission. Victoria stopped reading. For a moment, the numbers on the page blurred into something she could not organize. She remembered Marcus looking at her screen, not with greed, but with recognition, as if he knew exactly what could be lost when powerful people treated vulnerable lives like leverage. And she had dismissed him before he could explain why he cared. The boardroom door opened, and Evelyn stepped in carrying a tablet and 2 paper cups of coffee. Her face told Victoria the news before her mouth did. The bank will not extend, Evelyn said. Not without signed capital by tomorrow morning. Victoria absorbed it without moving. And Grant? Evelyn set 1 cup near her but did not sit. His office sent revised terms 10 minutes ago. Worse than before. Immediate governance seat. Expanded licensing authority. If we sign, we keep the lights on, but we lose the company piece by piece. The room seemed to sink. Victoria looked out at Chicago, where thousands of windows glowed through the rain, each one holding people who had no idea that a decision inside this room might someday affect whether their doctor caught an illness in time. She had spent years telling herself the mission mattered, but somewhere along the way, Survival had become louder than service. There has to be another investor, she said, though even she heard how thin it sounded. Evelyn did not answer right away. She placed her tablet on the table and turned it toward Victoria. On the screen was a news article from 3 weeks earlier. Reed Horizon announces $500 million allocation for ethical artificial intelligence in public health. Marcus's photograph appeared beside the headline. Same calm eyes. Same steady posture. No flash. No performance. Victoria stared at the image until the shame became physical, a tightness in her throat, a heat beneath her skin. He was not asking to enter our meeting, Evelyn said quietly. He was invited. Victoria closed her eyes. The rain kept moving down the glass like silver threads unraveling. In the silence, every polished surface in the room reflected the same truth back at her. She had not protected her company from an outsider. She had pushed away the one person who might have understood why it deserved to live. Marcus Reed did not go home after leaving Langford Medical Systems. He told his driver to take him to the South Side Clinic on East 71st Street, the one with the cracked brick exterior, the blue awning, and the children's mural painted across the waiting room wall. By the time he arrived, the rain had softened into a mist that hung over the streetlights like breath on glass. The clinic was supposed to close at 8, but light still spilled from the front windows, warm and stubborn against the wet pavement. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant, paper gowns, coffee that had been reheated too many times, and the faint sweetness of crayons. A little boy in a red hoodie sat beside his mother near the registration desk, swinging his sneakers above the floor because his feet did not quite reach. A nurse behind the counter looked up and smiled with tired relief. "Mr. Reed," she said, "we were not expecting you tonight." Marcus gave her a quiet nod. "Neither was I." He set his briefcase on a chair and loosened his tie, not because he was trying to look humble, but because this was the only kind of room where he could breathe after being trapped inside one made of glass and judgment. Here, nobody cared what watch he wore. Nobody measured a person by the cut of a suit. They cared whether the machine worked, whether the results came back, whether a mother could sleep before sunrise. He walked down the short hallway toward the diagnostic room, where one of Reed Horizon's donated scanning units hummed beside a wall painted pale green. The machine was not perfect. The screen had a scratch near the lower corner, and the printer jammed if the paper tray was filled too high. But it had caught things early. It had bought people time. To Marcus, that made it more beautiful than any tower downtown. Dr. Alicia Monroe, the clinic director, stood near the monitor with a folder in her hand. She was a small woman with silver-rimmed glasses and the kind of calm that came from years of turning panic into instructions. "You look like you had a boardroom day," she said. Marcus almost smiled. "Something like that." She studied him for a moment, then chose not to ask. That was one of the things he respected about her. She knew silence was not always emptiness. Sometimes it was a person holding himself together until the world stopped pressing on the seams. In the waiting room, the boy in the red hoodie coughed into his sleeve, and his mother rubbed his back with slow circles. Marcus watched them through the open doorway. The mother's purse sat on her lap, worn at the corners, stuffed with folded papers that looked like bills, test results, and hope in the same tired stack. He knew that kind of purse. His mother had carried one like it. Always heavy. Never enough inside. He stepped back into a hallway and took Naomi's photograph from his briefcase. Under the clinic lights, her yellow sweatshirt looked brighter than he remembered, her smile almost too alive for paper. The noise around him faded into the soft hum of the scanner, the distant roll of a cart, the rain ticking lightly against the window. He could still hear Victoria's voice, clean and cold, telling him where she believed he belonged. He could still feel the eyes in that room dropping away from him, not because they agreed with her fully, but because disagreeing would have cost them something. That was how harm survived in expensive rooms. Not always through shouting. Sometimes through silence wearing a badge and a salary. Marcus closed his eyes for one breath. Then another. He did not want revenge. Revenge was too small for what Naomi had taught him. Revenge would let Langford fall, let Grant Whitmore carve the company apart, let a life-saving technology disappear behind private contracts and profit targets. Revenge would feel satisfying for a day and cost strangers for years. If this moment touched your heart, give Marcus a like, because sometimes the strongest people are the ones who still choose to help after being humiliated. He slipped the photo back into its sleeve and returned to the waiting room, where the boy's mother was trying to understand a form full of words built to exhaust people. Marcus crouched a respectful distance away, keeping his voice gentle. "Ma'am, would you like someone to walk you through that?" She looked at him with guarded uncertainty, then nodded. For the next 10 minutes, Marcus explained every line slowly, without making her feel small for needing help. When she thanked him, her eyes shone with the fragile relief of someone who had been carrying too much alone. That was when his phone began to vibrate in his coat pocket. Once. Twice. Then again. He looked down. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. 1 message from Evelyn Brooks. Then a 4th call, this time from Victoria Langford's office. Marcus let it ring. He looked through the clinic window at the rain, at the street, at the reflection of his own face layered over the waiting families behind him. The world had a way of bringing powerful people to their knees only after they had mistaken kindness for weakness. He answered on the final ring, but said nothing. On the other end, for the first time since he had met her, Victoria Langford had to speak into silence she did not control. Victoria Langford did not speak at first. Marcus could hear only the faint static of the call, the distant hush of the clinic around him, and somewhere on her end, the hollow quiet of a room too large for one person. When her voice finally came through, it no longer had the clean, cutting certainty of the boardroom. It sounded controlled, but thin at the edges, like paper held too close to a flame. "Mr. Reed," she said, "this is Victoria Langford." Marcus stood near the clinic window, watching rainwater gather along the curb in silver streams. "I know." 2 words. Nothing more. On the other end, Victoria swallowed. He could hear it because silence had become the only honest thing between them. "I owe you an apology." In the boardroom, that sentence would have sounded like strategy. Here, with the smell of disinfectant in the air and a worried mother filling out forms behind him, it sounded smaller, human, unfinished. Marcus did not rescue her from it. He let the words stand there and weigh what they weighed. Victoria continued, slower now. "You were right about the clause. My chief financial officer confirmed the exposure. Whitmore's revised terms are worse. If we sign, we lose control of the platform." Marcus looked through the glass into the diagnostic room, where Dr. Monroe adjusted the scanner for the boy in the red hoodie. The child sat very still, trying to look brave while his mother held his hand. "I told you that yesterday," Marcus said quietly. "I know." There it was again, that small break in her voice, not dramatic, not theatrical, but real enough to be uncomfortable. "And I did not listen." Marcus turned away from the window. "No, Ms. Langford. You did not check my name. You did not check my appointment. You did not check the document before choosing the man who looked familiar over the one telling you the truth." The line went silent. At first, he thought she might defend herself. He had heard every version of it before. "I was under pressure. I misunderstood. You have to understand how it looked." But when Victoria answered, her voice had dropped almost to a whisper. "You are right." In her office downtown, Victoria stood barefoot on the cold carpet, her heels abandoned near the desk, the Reed Horizon file open beneath the yellow lamp. Outside her windows, Chicago was a blur of rain and headlights. Evelyn stood near the door with her arms folded, giving her privacy without leaving her alone. On Victoria's screen, the company's cash dashboard glowed red. Payroll due in 72 hours. Bridge loan denied. Emergency board session scheduled for 7 in the morning. Grant Whitmore's revised proposal sat beside it like a polished threat. Victoria looked at Marcus's photograph in the article again, then at the clinic images in the file, the children, the nurses, the small rural hospitals that did not have marble floors or private elevators. For the first time, she understood that Marcus had not entered her boardroom as a man chasing a seat at her table. He had come as a man deciding whether her table deserved saving. "I need to meet you," she said. Marcus glanced toward the waiting room. "My office can schedule something next week." The pause that followed was sharp enough to answer him. "We do not have next week. That is unfortunate." The words were not cruel. That made them harder. Victoria closed her eyes. She had commanded senators, negotiated with billionaires, and stared down board members twice her age, but asking this man for time after denying him basic dignity felt like standing in a room with no walls left to hide behind. "Please," she said. The word left her quietly, and Evelyn looked down, not to embarrass her by witnessing it. Marcus did not respond right away. The clinic light flickered once overhead, and the old scanner hummed through another cycle. He thought of Naomi. He thought of his mother reading hospital bills at the kitchen table. He thought of the boy in the next room, of the clinics waiting on technology that could not help anyone if Grant Whitmore locked it behind ownership terms designed for extraction instead of care. Finally, Marcus said, "I am at the East 71st Street Community Clinic. If you come here, come without your lawyers, without your public relations team, and without Mr. Whitmore." Victoria opened her eyes. "I can be there in 30 minutes. Do not come to perform regret," Marcus said. "Come prepared to tell the truth." The call ended before she could promise anything. Victoria stood still with the phone in her hand, listening to the absence he left behind. Then she picked up her coat. Evelyn stepped aside, but before Victoria reached the door, the older woman spoke softly. "This cannot be about saving your image." Victoria's hand paused on the handle. For once, she did not bristle. She did not argue. She looked back at the dark office, at the signed awards on the wall, at the tower she had mistaken for proof of worth. "No," she said. "It has to be about saving what is left of my conscience." Then she walked out into the rain, toward the man she had thrown away, carrying nothing but the truth she should have honored the first time. Victoria arrived at the clinic without an entourage, without a driver waiting at the curb, and without the armor that usually entered rooms before she did. Her black coat was damp from the rain, her hair had loosened slightly at the sides, and for the first time that day, her face looked less like a chief executive officer and more like a woman who had finally run out of ways to avoid herself. The clinic doors opened with a soft chime, and warm air met her carrying the smell of antiseptic, paper, wet umbrellas, and vending machine coffee. She stopped just inside the entrance. This was not the world where she normally made decisions. There was no marble, no skyline, no polished table long enough to separate guilt from consequence. A television mounted in the corner played the evening news with the volume low. A toddler slept across two plastic chairs under his mother's coat. An older man filled out insurance forms with a pencil worn almost to nothing. Behind the reception desk, a nurse looked up, recognized Victoria from magazine covers and company announcements, then looked past her toward Marcus, as if asking whether this woman belonged here. Marcus stood near the hallway to the diagnostic room, sleeves rolled to his forearms, tie loosened, old briefcase resting beside his chair. The contrast unsettled Victoria. In her boardroom, she had seen him as misplaced. Here, among tired families and humming medical equipment, he seemed anchored, as if the room had been built around the quiet gravity he carried. She walked toward him slowly. Every step across the worn tile sounded louder than it should have. "Mr. Reed," she said. Marcus did not offer his hand. He did not need to punish her. The absence was enough. "Ms. Langford." Victoria glanced around the waiting room, at the patients pretending not to watch, at the mother from earlier holding a clipboard close to her chest, at the little boy in the red hoodie now sitting with a sticker on his sleeve after finishing his scan. The boy smiled faintly at Marcus, and Marcus nodded back with a warmth Victoria had not earned. Something in her chest tightened. "I came to apologize," she said. Marcus held her gaze. "Then start with what you did." The sentence was calm, but it stripped away every polished version she had rehearsed in the car. Victoria looked down at her hands. They were still cold from the rain. I saw a black man enter my boardroom without the signals I associate with power, and I decided you were not worth listening to. I ignored your appointment. I mocked your place in the room. I used a phrase that carried more history and cruelty than I allowed myself to admit when I said it. I humiliated you in front of people who should have heard me do better. The waiting room went still, not dramatically, but carefully, as if everyone understood that something rare was happening and did not want to break it. Marcus's expression did not change. And why are you here now? Victoria swallowed. Because you were right. Because Grant Whitmore is trying to take the platform. Because my company may not survive 72 hours without capital. But also because survival does not erase what I did. I am not here to ask you to forget it. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then turned and walked toward a small consultation room off the hallway. Come in. Inside, the room was barely large enough for 2 chairs, a desk, and a wall-mounted blood pressure cuff. Rain tapped against a narrow window. A fluorescent light buzzed softly overhead. Victoria sat when he gestured, not at the head of anything, not above anyone, just across from him in a room where status had nowhere to sit. Marcus placed the Whitmore term sheet between them. Your company built something useful, he said. Useful enough that men like Grant want to own it. Useful enough that losing it would hurt people who will never attend your board meetings. Victoria nodded. I know. No, Marcus said gently. You understand the market. That is not the same thing as knowing the people. He opened a folder and slid forward photographs from clinics across the country: Mississippi, Kentucky, Oklahoma, West Virginia, South Chicago. These are the places your platform could reach if it is protected. Not monetized into a wall. Not stripped for data rights. Protected. Victoria looked at the photographs one by one. Small hospitals. Tired nurses. Children in waiting rooms. Her technology, removed from investor decks and returned to human faces. What are your terms? She asked quietly. Marcus leaned back. $500 million in staged investment. No sale of patient data models. No Whitmore governance seat. Rural and low-income clinic access must be written into the expansion plan. Your board creates an ethics committee with real authority, not decoration. And tomorrow morning, before I sign anything, you apologize publicly to the employees who watched you reduce me to a stereotype. Victoria's face tightened, but not with anger. With the pain of knowing he had asked for exactly what was necessary. And if I do that? Marcus looked toward the window, where rain streaked the glass like the day trying to wash itself clean. Then I invest in the mission. Not in your pride. Victoria sat very still. She had expected humiliation. She had prepared for cold revenge, impossible terms, maybe even refusal. Instead, he had offered her a narrow bridge back toward decency, and somehow that felt harder to accept than punishment. Why would you still help me? She asked. Marcus's eyes returned to her. I am not helping only you. In the silence that followed, the clinic hummed around them, alive with small needs and fragile hopes. Victoria finally understood. Kindness was not softness. It was discipline. It was strength that had survived insult and still chosen purpose over pride. She lowered her eyes and nodded once. Then I will tell the truth tomorrow. Marcus closed the folder. That is where we start. The next morning, the 48th floor filled before sunrise. Engineers came up from the 32nd floor still wearing hoodies under their badges. Legal staff stood near the back wall with laptops tucked under their arms. Assistants, analysts, project leads, and department heads crowded quietly around the glass boardroom, drawn by a company-wide message Victoria had sent at 6:15 in the morning asking everyone who could attend to come in person. No one knew exactly what would happen. They only knew the company had been standing at the edge of collapse, and now Marcus Reed was walking out of the elevator beside Evelyn Brooks, carrying the same weathered leather briefcase Victoria had dismissed the day before. The room changed when he entered. Not because he demanded attention, but because people remembered how he had left. A few faces lowered with shame. Others watched him with open curiosity. The young black analyst from the lobby stood near the wall, hands folded around her badge, her eyes bright with something careful and guarded. Marcus saw her and gave the same small nod he had given the day before. This time, she did not look away. Victoria stood at the head of the table, but the seat beside her had been pulled out. Not for Grant Whitmore. Not for a banker. For Marcus. Grant was not in the room. His proposal lay printed on the table in a red folder marked rejected. The word looked almost too simple for the damage it had nearly done. Victoria wore a navy suit, no jewelry except a plain watch, her hair pulled back but not severe. She looked tired. She also looked awake in a way she had not before. When Marcus stopped near the chair, she did not ask him to sit yet. She stepped forward, turned to face the employees gathered behind the glass and around the table, and rested both hands lightly on the chair in front of her. For a moment, all anyone heard was the building air system, the soft buzz of screens, and the morning rain drying on the windows. Yesterday, Victoria began, her voice steady but lower than usual. I failed this company before I ever looked at a balance sheet. No one moved. A man came into this room for a meeting we had confirmed. He came prepared. He came with knowledge that could protect what all of you have built. Instead of verifying who he was, I judged him by appearance, by assumptions, and by a prejudice I should have confronted in myself long before it spoke through me. Her eyes shifted to Marcus, then back to the room. I spoke to Marcus Reed in a way that was disrespectful, racially insulting, and unworthy of the mission we claim to serve. I embarrassed him publicly, so I am apologizing publicly. Mr. Reed, I was wrong. I am sorry. The silence after her words was not empty. It was full, heavy, listening. Marcus did not smile. He did not make the room comfortable by accepting too quickly. He let the apology remain visible. Then he gave one slow nod. Thank you for telling the truth. It was not absolution. It was a beginning. Victoria turned to the employees again. Reed Horizon Capital has agreed to invest $500 million, under terms that protect our patient data models, preserve our independence, and require us to expand access for rural and low-income clinics across the United States. We will not sell the heart of this company to survive the morning. We will earn the right to survive by remembering who this work is for. This time, a sound moved through the room, not applause at first, but breath. Relief passing from person to person. Someone near the back covered her mouth. An engineer bowed his head. Evelyn removed her glasses and wiped them slowly, though they were not the problem. Marcus sat at the table and opened his briefcase. From inside he removed the final agreement, its pages marked not with traps, but with protections. Victoria sat across from him. The pen between them looked small for what it carried. Before signing, Marcus glanced toward the window. Morning light had broken through the clouds and spread across Chicago in thin gold bands, touching the river, the glass towers, the wet sidewalks where people were already moving toward work, hospitals, bus stops, and lives too complicated to fit inside investor language. He thought of Naomi's yellow sweatshirt. He thought of his mother's tired hands smoothing bills across a kitchen table. He thought of the clinic on East 71st Street, the boy in the red hoodie, the mother who had nodded when someone finally explained the form. Then he signed. Victoria signed after him. No one cheered right away. The moment did not need noise. Justice had entered the room quietly, placed itself in the chair that had been denied, and written its name in black ink. Later, when the employees returned to their floors and the first announcement went out to the hospitals waiting across the country, Marcus walked alone toward the elevator. Victoria followed him only as far as the glass doors. Mr. Reed, she said softly. He turned. Her eyes were wet, but her voice held. I will do better. Marcus looked at her, not coldly, not warmly, but with the steady measure of a man who believed change meant nothing until it became behavior. Make sure they can say that when I am not in the room. The elevator opened. Marcus stepped inside. As the doors closed, sunlight crossed the polished floor and reached the empty space where he had stood the day before, The place where he had been dismissed, the place now filled only with light.